Welcome to a new episode of the Life Science Get Together podcast. Today with a very special topic, which basically is one of my favorite topics, digital health. So I have to watch out that I'm not carried away in the intro to the episode. So can you please stop me after 85 minutes so that we have 5 minutes left for EIT Health? I'm very happy today to have on the episode two people from one of Europe's most important initiatives, EIT Health, Höller and Joy Cürten. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks, Christian.
Maybe I give a little bit of background why I love or why I like digital health. It's basically a topic that I discovered very early in my life. It's back in the 80s, and it consisted of three parts. So one is health, the other one is technology, and the third part, in my opinion, is business. And since the 80s, a lot has evolved. So one of the disruptive innovations that I got aware of was, let's say, in the 90s, the development of the internet and the mobile industry with technologies like, for example, Amazon, the online bookstore, or later on the disruption of the music industry, entertainment industry by Apple with the iTunes store. And I missed a little bit the pharmaceutical industry and the healthcare sector, which didn't show much of traction in that area. Until, in my opinion, 2010, when I first perceived that slowly also the digital world was moving towards the pharmaceutical industry. And I realized a stronger pull couple of years ago. I think it was in 2013-15, when the first startup companies approached me. I was working back then in drug development, vaccine development, and some digital companies said, Christian, look, we have some innovative ideas. Can you help us to find investors? And I thought it should be an easy game, because digital technology is disruptive by itself. Everybody should know that. So talking investors into investing such startup companies should be easy. But I was wrong. Actually, it wasn't so, because on one hand, the pharmaceutical deep tech investors said, it's too much digital. And on the other side, the digital investor said it's too much pharma. So we were basically in between. But the nice thing is, the following years, a lot's developed. So new investment funds emerged. And one investor that I had the pleasure to talk with at the panel discussion in 2019 in the United States put it in a very nice speech and said Fitbit, that was back 2019, made a sleep study, which I looked up yesterday, and they collected 60 billion data points. And this investor was a deep tech investor who is proficient in investing in drug development. I said, basically, we are happy when we conduct a clinical trial if we get a few hundreds to a few thousand data points, and Fitbit got 60 billion. So just imagine what happens if this digital revolution just takes on. And since 2019, I lost a little bit track. So I'm very happy, and I hope I end now the opening words, that you both are here. And let's give us, me and the audience, a little bit of insight what's going on in Europe, what's hot in Europe, how did the industry evolve since 2019, and especially with special focus on the pandemic, where is the industry heading in the future? Kurt and Joy, maybe you also start a little bit with giving your background so that you frame the podcast a bit, and then let's jump into EIT Health and the digital revolution. Joy, would you like to start?
Sure, I'd like to start. First of all, I probably helped in collecting at least 1 million of those data points. I have been a Fitbit user for about 10 years, so I guess that's an accomplishment. Indeed, I'm German, but I grew up in California. So I would say that I actively participated in some of these digital health revolutions that you just were talking about. My fourth grade teacher taught me about Napster in my math class. So I'll always be thankful for him for not only teaching me algebra, math, and geometry, but also for giving me some insights into the digital world. And indeed, I studied microbiology and immunology, which in the beginning was always not so interesting, so to say. Everyone said that non-communicable diseases were out and that we would no longer have to deal with infections. That's of course different now that we have a pandemic. So I studied in UCLA, and after that, I was interested in the technological applications of healthcare, of science, and I began working in a medical simulation lab, helping doctors to basically perform surgeries better and to apply new technologies and new care pathways, and kind of learning along the go about how these professionals adapted to new technologies was something that made me interested in public health, which I then studied. And I studied that in Germany. So I moved back to Germany, studied public health there, and realized that Germany was quite behind in terms of digital applications. Not only was it very challenging to track a website and understand even what the course offerings were or what the material is that we had to learn, but I just realized that the acceptance and the conservatism of Germany was definitely prominent. I think, growing up in Silicon Valley, once I did finish my studies, I was looking for exactly that piece of innovation and entrepreneurship in Europe. And I, as a European and as a German, wanted to contribute to that, to seeing what I had seen in the US and California, that fast pace of technology. And that's how I found EIT Health. Meanwhile, I've been working at EIT Health for 4 years, almost 5, and I'm just about to receive my diploma for my MBA in the mail as well, and am extremely excited by all of the entrepreneurs that we've had and supported, many of which I used to know by name in the beginning, Kurt as well, I think. But meanwhile, with 1,000 startups in the portfolio, I'm not sure I can name all of them. But they're very inspiring, and were also one of the topics for my thesis, which was just turned in. But so Kurt and I have grown some startups along the way, but of course they've done most of the work themselves, and quite a majority of them are in the digital health and medtech space.
It's great to hear. So you came from Silicon Valley to Europe. It reminded me of, I think it was from Plato, Aristotle, allegory of the cave. So I hope it's not too politically incorrect, but coming from Silicon Valley to the European cave to support the development of digital health here is a great thing. I think you have seen probably what I like in the Bay Area is how the investment scene evolved and everything around entrepreneurship and how to build and scale companies. So that's very valuable. Kurt, where are you coming from?
Thanks, Christian. I'm actually half Austrian and half German, but I'm born in Munich. So I grew up in Bavaria. I got familiar to entrepreneurship already through my family. My father running his own company and his family business, where I got already early involved. Got to a boarding school, actually, to a monastery boarding school for 9 years. Had 9 years of Latin, lots of physics and mathematics. But then in the end, I decided to study electrical engineering at the University of Erlangen. There I, in the first 5 years, focused on technology, I would say, on sensors, on also data processing a bit. I worked a lot in the Fraunhofer Institute, the one in Erlangen that invented MP3. So it was great to get in touch with scientists over there. And then at some point of time, rather to the end of my studies, I get in touch with a great professor who taught us the algorithms of medical image processing. That was a lecture that was not part of my curriculum. It was part of the computer science department, but it was so amazing and fascinating that I just visited that. And there, actually, I somehow got into a PhD at the computer science department with that professor, who is nowadays the president of the university in Erlangen. And there I learned how fascinating the area of medical technology, of even back then, artificial intelligence in biomedical engineering is. We call it differently. We called it pattern recognition, but in the end, that was where I put my PhD thesis on. I had not the chance to grow up in the US and in Silicon Valley like Joy, but at least I had some research stays at Johns Hopkins University. So in the end, I then took the opportunity to go to their labs and also to learn about interdisciplinary collaboration at the Johns Hopkins Homewood campus in the north, where all kind of engineering people work together, from mechanical engineering, computer science, electrical engineering, and so on, together, of course, with clinicians. And then after that, I also did an MBA in entrepreneurship, just to get more insights into the business area. And out of the PhD, we realized there is a great need in biomedical engineering and bachelor and master course for that, which did not exist. So I somehow got the task, together with my PhD advisor and friend Achim Honegger, to develop a new bachelor and master course on biomedical engineering. And I did that. We started that. It got one of the most successful bachelor programs in that field in Europe, I would say. Many thousands of students have gone through that program, and it's really interesting to see that what I thought would be interesting to those students is now taught to those that then, after their studies, go to Siemens or Philips or GE or all the others in that space. In order to also have a framework for that bachelor and master program, we created a Central Institute of Healthcare Engineering, where I was the founding director of. And that Central Institute was formed out of 50 professors from all kinds of disciplines. And we coordinated lots of research and collaboration projects with Siemens, with Fraunhofer. We got funding from the Federal Ministry of Education and Research, 40 million in total, mainly acquired through Medical Valley. And its CEO, the former Siemens Healthineers CEO, Erich Reinhardt. So that was also a great environment for me to grow and to learn a lot. And out of that position, I represented the area, so mainly University of Erlangen, Medical Valley, Fraunhofer, and Siemens, in a consortium that was newly built to apply for a European funding. I didn't know anything about that at the point of time when I joined that in 2012. But then it turned out that the top universities in Europe, but also the top industry players, got together. It took a couple of years. So in the end, we submitted the final proposal in 2014, a proposal for receiving 1 billion euro in order to drive innovation and entrepreneurship in healthcare in Europe, together with a very strong partnership. That proposal was successful. So we have been successfully selected. And until the submission phase, I was spokesperson of all the German universities, and I was member of the executive committee of that consortium. And once we had submitted our proposal and got successfully selected, I just took the chance to also apply for the management board of that, or a management position in that new entity. And after 3 months of heavy assessment center, I made it there, and that's a position that I still have as a director of business creation at EIT Health. I forgot to say, that's maybe also important. On my academic way, I also was founder and co-founder of several startups. So I also have that startup DNA, which is always important to keep in mind. And I also learned a bit of that. And now that kind of brings me back to Joy. In my MBA, I had several courses and classes at Santa Clara University, which is located right in Silicon Valley. So I also got that entrepreneurship DNA, which is so important for my nowadays business.
Very impressive. Congratulations. I'm listening to podcasts from Silicon Valley, so we have something in common. 1 billion fundraising to start EIT Health. Did I understand that correctly?
Yes, it's in total, it's 1 billion euro over lifetime, over 15 years. Not everything was paid out in 2015 when we then officially started. It was ramped up slowly. We started with roughly 20 million euro in 2016. And then we increased our budget last year in 2022. We had our peak with significantly more than 100 million euro. And now the funding is getting reduced throughout the next 10 years. And we have to replace the funding through own revenues that we create with our programs. But overall, it's a 1 million euro investment, you could say, of the European Commission and the European Union into our organization, into our consortium in order to drive innovation in health.
That's very impressive. Congratulations. Can you give a little bit of background to EIT Health, how this 1 billion converted into activities in Europe?
So in the end, let's start where the idea comes from. The former president Barroso visited MIT or visited MIT, Harvard, and other important institutions in Cambridge, Boston area, but he was super much impressed already 20 years ago, actually. One has to keep in mind, or 15 years ago, one has to keep in mind that there was such a strong collaboration between industry, academia, politicians, last but not least, but also together with investors and entrepreneurs. So those 5 stakeholders collaborated very well in order to drive innovation. And he did not know that from the European landscape, at least not at that scale. And then he flew back and said, I want to have something like that ecosystem also in Europe. And then he pretty quickly realized that he could not select at certain locations somewhere in Europe to concentrate all the top scientists, all the top players in industry and academia to build up that ecosystem. Therefore, his idea was to put money in the middle and bring all those actors, so like representatives from industry and academia, together to build consortia and to provide a plan what they would do with that money to create a similar type of ecosystem, even if it would be a virtual ecosystem. So not at one place, it would be a network that links all those great institutions across Europe. He started with that 12 years ago, and there we had the first 3 so-called knowledge and innovation communities. We could also call them faculties. There was energy, climate, and digital. That was the first 3. And then 5 years later, he created, or there was a second call launched for health and raw materials. And each of those 5 faculties, now we have 3 more, got the commitment of 1 billion euro over lifetime. And that was kind of the carrot that you always need to bring all those actors together. And once they have come together and once they have laid out a plan how to do that, then of course there's a dynamic that exceeds by far just the pure funding that is put into, because the collaboration itself, I think, is the huge value. It's not just the funding; it's really the collaboration that was triggered through that funding.
I completely agree to what you say. Capital is always a big enabler to move things forward. And I believe in Europe, especially when we come to deep tech, there is still, compared to the United States and China, still a huge gap. And any money that flows into the direction of the digital world or health tech or pharma development is very helpful. You mentioned that MIT was a role model for EIT Health, but there is no university, or is there did I miss something? Is there an EIT university, or did you decide to choose a slightly different model?
So EIT indeed sounds exactly like MIT, and that is by purpose, European Institute of Innovation and Technology, and that exists, but it's no university. It's it's an official institution of the European Commission. So EIT is in the end the funding body that provides the funding. The consortia themselves, of course, include universities. So we have many top universities across Europe, or actually all the top 5 if you look into the most innovative universities ranking from Reuters. And I think 50% from the 25 top universities. So we have those universities as part of EIT Health, but it is not a university itself. In general, we are a partner-driven organization. So in total, that's 150 partners that form and build that organization. We are an official association. In German, it's an EV, eingetragener Verein, which is pretty funny. Having an EV managing €1 billion of funding, that is.
It's innovative. It's innovative. Yeah. No, I completely agree with what you say. I mean, I think we have wonderful universities and a lot of great researchers already in Europe. So focusing on building the ecosystem to help to foster collaboration and innovation across Europe is a very smart move. Very smart move. Joy, what is your role at EIT Health? Which initiatives do you coordinate?
Great. Thanks so much for the question. Maybe just briefly going back to one aspect that we're talking about with the universities. I think one interesting thing that the aim of the EIT initiatives is to find a structured framework among the most innovative universities that there are in Europe, and to try to ensure that there is a way to exchange information and best practice. And therefore, one aspect that EIT does have, for instance, are label degree programs that all of the universities offer that have the seal of EIT. So it's not just offered at one university, but several. So I think that's an interesting aspect because these label degree programs are, of course, very focused on the particular, verticals like health or digital mobility. But going away from the universities and also the structure of EIT, basically although our work is always focused around how do we bridge university, industry, and startups together, the aspect that I'm responsible for is the accelerator, which basically I see myself as an advocate for the startups while still maintaining and integrating the other two pieces of the industry and the university together. So we at the accelerator have a portfolio of different programs that we offer our startups, from rather early stage where startups participate in 2-month boot camps or react to a pharmaceutical challenge that one of our pharmaceutical partners has offered, where they're looking for a particular solution, whether it be, usually they are in digital health and in following the patient journey. But we also offer programs to support companies in mentoring and coaching during their validation process, as well as soft landing programs where we actually where we tackle the issues of European companies from, for instance, Germany looking to expand to France and Spain, to other large markets. And finally, we also offer financing programs to allow companies to scale and to be competitive and catapult them forward. So from these programs that we have, we have about, I think, around 18 or so actively today. My responsibility is to integrate and make sure that we have a startup journey. However, that's really not very easy, because as innovative as startups may be, you understand that they are looking for exactly what they need in their startup journey. And although we may have mapped something out particularly for them, that's often not the case.
That's great. Let me connect to what you both said a little bit from my story. So basically in the 80s, when I got interested in computer technology, let's just call it this way, we were just nerds. So these loners who were sitting alone in front of a computer doing something. When these nerds grew older, they usually went to the universities, and there I helped also studying, providing services to people like building websites. And in one point in time, suddenly revenues came in, and then the question arose, what should we do? And the advice was mostly from tax consultants, you need to create a company. So it was out of necessity, product market fit, we create companies. And then usually these companies ended quite quickly because the scaling was next to impossible. I grew up in Styria, as investment capital was lacking. We didn't have any terminology. So startup, scale up, all these new terms that are coming up recently. And when I look at the digital health sector, I'm a little bit overwhelmed currently. So we have digital health. We have, yesterday I read an article on Visual Capitalist about the health tech revolution. Then Cathie Wood, for example, from the ARC funds, has identified 5 platforms of innovation. It's like robotics, blockchain technology. And there's so many terms on the internet right now. Can you help me a little bit with giving the definition of EIT Health, how you see the actual development in the healthcare sector and which terminology you use?
Actually, that's not an easy one, as you say. So let's put it that way. Among the more than 1,000 startups that we have, we try to classify them, or actually we ask them to classify themselves. So we ask them, are you medtech? Are you biotech diagnostics? Or are you digital health? And then they have to put themselves somewhere. That is, for example, especially important in our EIT Health Catapult. That's our Europe-wide business plan competition with hundreds of thousands of prize money. That is something very, of course, it makes also a difference to them if they compete with medtech companies that usually are a bit more mature, or if they compete in the category with digital health startups that are usually a bit less mature, but where we see even more applications. So it's also up to them. In general, I would say we summarize within digital health everything that has to do something with mobile health, like the apps that we know. But usually we want to have medical products, so apps that are registered as a medical product and even get reimbursement ideally. Of course, everything that has something to do with healthcare IT, medical image processing, for example, with a strong focus on artificial intelligence. Very important, personalized health. So where we also need to use many data points in order to predict a bit the health status of the patient. Also, a very important area is wearable technologies. There you could argue, is it more medtech because it consists usually of sensors, or is the secret more in the algorithms that then process the data that are recorded by the sensors? So usually we see that as a digital health product. Or of course, everything that has to do with telemedicine, telehealth, that's also part of digital health. In the end, it's always the question: software versus hardware. What is the important factor? Where is the IP related to? What's the secret of the company?
Joy, how do you define the many companies that you see? Which terminology do you use in your acceleration activities?
You know, in the very beginning, as Kurt just mentioned, we had some struggles to define it ourselves, and we actually used all of the insights from our partners that work with us in the accelerator to help define it, with us. So I think indeed the aspects of information technology, medical imaging processing, and wearables, and telehealth and telemedicine were very deeply discussed in the last few years, and as of right now, I would definitely agree to those aspects. However, of course, we continue to see more pharmaceutical companies with digital health applications, or where the pharmaceutical aspect of the product and the service that the company is offering is actually the part that is more, I don't know, I would say untouchable, whereas what they're seeking support with is the digital health application. So we see some challenges when we see startups like this applying, where we realize that although they're a pharmaceutical diagnostic company, although they're a pharmaceutical company that has a product on the market, the tandem product is what they are applying for our services and for our support for. And there's where we are currently having some new discussions about how they fit into our pipeline and how we can best service and support them.
That's great. I was just looking up on the internet a company that's name I forgot. So as you mentioned, that pharma is not so much interested in one part of the offering, but in the other part. And the first time I heard it was a couple of years ago when when Roche acquired an Austrian company, which unfortunately I forgot the name. It's operating in diabetes, and as far as I remember, Roche was interested in the data they generated. So basically, the app was developed to help diabetic patients to just keep track of the development of their disease, and Roche bought it because of the huge amount of data they had collected over the years, which pretty much connects to the Fitbit story with 60 billion data points for a sleep study. But nevertheless, until 2020, I had the feeling that it was just a slow movement from pharma towards the digital sector, and that a lot of innovation potential was not really, let's say, unlocked by investments of the pharma industry and also the medical device industry. Then suddenly in March 2020, we had the Black Swan event. Pandemic hits the world, and first they thought, especially with investments on the stock market, everything is over now. We have a huge crash, but it didn't happen. So it reverted quite quickly, and the digital sector really took off. From what I heard from you both, you have really a sweet spot in Europe. So you are sitting in between the different interest groups. So you have the startups, you have the scale-ups, you have politics, and you have the big companies. What I'm curious to hear from you is how did the pandemic shape the European ecosystem in the last couple of months? What changes did you see due to the pandemic in the digital health sector? Kurt?
Yeah, I would say one common saying in the meantime is that the COVID-19 crisis has brought 10 years of market evolution in just 10 weeks. I heard that now several times from different people, and that's really true. And it's not so much that research was sped up so quickly, or that there have been scientific breakthroughs in digital health areas. It's more the overall adoption, the awareness that digital tools, that digital algorithms have a major impact. And I mean, that starts with everyone in their daily life. Usually you had personal meetings, and in some cases you had online meetings, and now everyone is totally used to use all the online tools. To even shift whole conferences into online editions and online versions, and of course also this webinar, this podcast is online. So I think people get used to that. That's the first thing. And with that acceptance, they looked into how would digital tools and digital life also apply to healthcare, because on the one hand, everyone was looking forward to vaccination and maybe some treatments from the pharma industry. On the other hand, everyone also realized that due to the lockdowns and shutdowns, many of the usual personal interventions did not take place anymore, because hospitals were either overloaded or closed in order to avoid infections. So people really intensively looked into alternatives and possibilities, not only in the education sector in schools, where we also saw a quick, or even in lectures at universities, where we saw a quick rise, but also in healthcare and within healthcare providers. So that huge interest certainly changed a lot. Nevertheless, I'd like to point out that EIT Health is in a really different position, interesting position, because when we started our health catapult in 2016, we already had that category of digital health. So we already split it into medtech, biotech, and digital health. And in the beginning, there was not so much interest into the digital health category, but we nevertheless had great companies. And that kind of brought us on a track where we took care on digital health companies with the same intensity like with medtech or even biotech. Actually, 40% of our portfolio pretty constantly actually have been in the area of digital health. And I just looked it up this morning. Among the 1,000 companies that we support, we have obviously a bit more than 400 companies in digital health, and 60 of them are in Germany, 55 in France, 40 in UK and Spain, 30 in Ireland, Netherlands and Sweden, 20 in Belgium, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of digital health companies. But the important point, the adoption, the possibility to get their products approved in the regulatory affairs process, to get reimbursement for that, to get into collaborations with important corporates and partners from pharma industry, that of course has increased a lot in the last 18 months. So I think we already had a lot upfront, but the speed how that is now getting into the market, that has been dramatically increased in the last 18 months.
Joy, which changes do you see in your activities on the market in the last couple of months due to the pandemic?
I'll answer this in a two-part question, maybe from one aspect from the patient consumer side, and then from the aspect of the accelerator EIT Health side. What I have noticed is that the citizens, because all patients are citizens, but not all citizens are patients at the same time. So I think we might not be the one being treated at this one exact moment, but at one point in our life, we will also be treated as patients. But I see that because it has never been convenient to start the process of telemedicine, of telehealth, particularly in Germany, and the convenience of it for doctors was very low, and still is, I think, low to this day. However, due to necessity, it really has increased the awareness of citizens, patients, caregivers, how useful of a technology, how useful of a tool technology can be. And yesterday, while I was doing some work, I received a phone call from my insurance company, and I was wondering if I had not paid a bill or something. And in the end, my insurance for the first time was calling me to ask me if I had done any preventative healthcare steps recently. And it took me a little bit aback, but I realized that the openness and the large availability of these insurance apps was also related to the changes and the shifts that had happened in 18 months. 18 months ago, I don't think I would have answered that phone call. But this time, I figured they might have some interesting topics. For instance, telling me that my costs have gone up for the year due to the pandemic, but instead I was happily surprised that they were really pushing the preventative health agenda. And they're also, learned some great phone etiquette along the way. But from the perspective of leading our portfolio of programs, in March, at the start of the pandemic, we were sitting in our virtual conference rooms, wondering for the first 2 days after I had just gotten back from holidays, stuck in the airport, trying to get back in the grips of the pandemic. What should we do as EIT Health, and what is it that we can do for our startups at this moment? It took some brainstorming, and there were loads of EIT Health initiatives, such as a matchmaking platform on our website for innovators to meet each other that had part of what they thought were the solution. But specifically, what I led through the accelerator was an initiative where we received money from the European Union, the Crisis Response Initiative, and this funded our Startup Rescue Instrument. In the Startup Rescue Instrument, we were provided with 5 million to select companies, 10 to 11 companies, in order to support them during a period where they saw some of their supporting investors leaving the round. So in many cases, the lead investor was still committed, but due to the insecurity of the market, due to what you just mentioned, Christian, the stock market, plummeting for that second and everyone panicking, this portfolio first aspect was felt by the companies, where suddenly the good relationships that they had had with interested investors dropped. To just say, I need to look at what I've already invested in order to ensure that I have secured my own family's namesake. And so within a period of 3 months, we had created a new program for emergency support for startups, selected these startups, and also sent them on their way to create project plans for how they would survive the next 12 months. And this is a process that generally usually takes our communities, especially those that work within or connected to government institutions, a year and a half or so, because it does take the entire effort of everyone in one organization. But we were lucky enough to have that within our team, and also within our partnership, and the experts in our community that all came together to understand the necessity and be able to provide some extra firepower for these companies so that they could make it to their second part of their Series B round, for instance.
Echo what Joy just said. That was a very interesting insight. So in the beginning, we thought, okay, that seems to be interesting, and there will be a lot of attention to our startups, providing either support in fighting COVID, or providing digital solutions in order to still keep on support. And we got first signals, so it was not obvious to me in the beginning, but we got very quickly in April signals that fundraising rounds would not be completed and would be put on hold for the reasons that Joy just outlined, the portfolio first approach of all the investors to keep their money together for their existing companies. And I then checked with many people in our environment, not only the startups, but for example, a friend of mine, Thomas Turner, who is heading the capital equity markets in the DACH region for Morgan Stanley. He totally confirmed that everything is put on hold and that nothing is moving forward for many startups, even if they are actually now absolutely on the rise, have a strong capital need. And we then put together a package for the commission and outlined that to the commission, that there is an urgent need of funding to save those fundraising rounds. We don't have to cover everything, but we have to put that signal that the European Union is also contributing to help closing those fundraising rounds, to keep all the other investors together. And that's then in the end what we did. And you have to imagine, I mean, our team is not too small, roughly 25 people in the accelerator team at EIT Health. But so beyond all the daily work and business they had to do, we had put together this crisis instrument for startups where we had to do a lot of due diligence under Joy's leadership. We had far more than 100 companies that applied. They had a valuation of more than 5 million euros. They had an open fundraising round. They had to show that the fundraising round was above 1 million euro, which is not too small in digital health. And still there was a huge interest and huge visibility also among the European investors. So in the end, we have been able to close that within a month, more or less. So from starting the process, getting the money from the commission, selecting the companies in multiple steps, involving other investors to do a proper due diligence, and then in the end, awarding the money to those companies in order to close their financing rounds. And also, we also required that the companies would still come with an external lead investor, so that it's not only EIT Health funding, so that they also bring external investors, even if it's less than thought before. Was a great success story. And from my perspective, the most interesting thing is that it really also helped companies that actually had a big opportunity at that point of time. One of those companies that we funded, based in Erlangen, was focused on telehealth, more or less. So monitoring patients with Parkinson's disease with a sensor in their shoes, with a remote control tool. So in the end, it's exactly what was needed in the time, and even for them, it was difficult to close their rounds. And with our support, and last but not least, the commission's support, they closed the fundraising round and got a lot of additional funding afterwards. But I think that was a super strong signal.
No, the public funding scene in Europe is excellent. I realized that. To connect to what you said, last year in March, I think the first hit that I experienced was that the Bio Europe went digital and was prepared to go to Paris, but unfortunately it didn't happen. And I got pretty much the same message that you said. Initially, the investors said, okay, let's focus on our portfolios. Let's see that the companies we have already can survive. And it looked like that not much is going on in the investment world in Europe. So it reminded me back in March when I started the predecessor of this podcast. It was basically a quarterly meetup of life science investors and entrepreneurs. And the reason why I did it was that I did a little bit of research on the European private funding market, not the public funding market, which is early stage. And I compared it with China and the United States. And the interesting thing was that got the number for Europe that private investments in the healthcare sector, it's diagnostics, medical devices, digital, and therapeutics, is about 3.7 billion euros back in 2017. And in China and in the United States, the private sector invests 4 to 5 times this amount. So it's about, let's say, 20 billion at the minimum per year. I thought back then I found the holy investment grail. So we have a lot of underfinanced companies here in Europe, great technology. And I thought it is a smart move to fly to the United States. And the question that's coming, Joy, is directed to you. And I thought that it must be easy to convince the US investors to invest in Europe, because I saw these high valuations in the United States. So it was going up. It was a little bit on the contrary. You have in the US back in 2017-18, not so many companies like compared to the capital that was on the market. So I thought, let's talk the investors into investing in Europe. It created a huge laughter on the investor side, because they say, what do you think? We know that the European market is underfinanced and you have great technology, but you don't have one thing. It's entrepreneurs. So I was curious because I always thought Europe is basically great in technology and entrepreneurship, and I asked these investors, why do you say that? And they said, look, Christian, when we talk to European founders, what they try to do is to sell to us their product. They don't offer their company. So it's a very tech-driven society and ecosystem. What you miss are the entrepreneurs. When we talk to US-based entrepreneurs, they talk how they build companies and not so much about the product. We are not their customers, we are their investors. So I perceived in the description of these investors a cultural difference between the Silicon Valley tech sector and entrepreneurship and products and technology, and how the European landscape is perceived. Now I'm curious, Joy, you know both ecosystems. How do you see these cultural differences? Are they still there after what we experienced in the last 18 months? Or was I just lucky to speak to a certain class of investors who only know a small part of the European ecosystem?
Well, I haven't been able to travel to the US for the last 18 months, so I wouldn't be able to measure the sentiment or the changes that have happened in the US since. But I can certainly see that in Europe, one aspect of the entrepreneurship is changing. And like you were saying, I think we are very technology focused in Europe. We have great research institutions. We have patent centers that are actively working and are even housed in Munich, where our EIT Health EV headquarters are. However, the selling of the lifestyle of the entrepreneur, I think, is maybe the main key that is necessary in order to sell the company and not the product. And I think the lifestyle of the entrepreneur concept is something we are increasingly, I think, more aware of when in recently, because one thing that the US has always been great at is connecting digitally, whether it is using Slack, whether it is using Reddit. Through subreddit posts, you can dive very deeply into one particular category of investment or into a niche market where you understand cryptocurrency valuations, or through Telegram. Everything is excessively connected and interconnected within California, at least. And you feel that energy when you walk into a coffee shop, whether you're ordering your Starbucks necessity coffee with 7 different ingredients. But meanwhile, you're hearing how businesses are made, and the energy of wanting to always pitch all the time. I do feel that in some circumstances, in some small hubs within Europe, you start to feel that a little bit more. When I walked into a Barcelona incubator, this was already 18 months ago, but to kind of feel the vibrancy and the energy of that connecting everything with the coffee shop, or even actually in Erlangen, which is Kurt's hometown. I think I told him once that I had this feeling that I was in Stanford when I was in a parking lot in Erlangen, because in the meantime, 3 people that had been connected to research institutions all accidentally met in the Aldi parking lot buying their groceries. And this happenstance and serendipity is, I think, what really drives everything forward. We have to make sure to continue engaging and following up on those offers to be mentored, or those offers to mentor others. And that helpfulness is maybe not yet there. This extreme friendliness that you sometimes feel in California, and I think that can really contribute to making Europe more entrepreneurial so that we also increase our valuations here.
Christian, where you have that quote from, because Christoph Lengauer, who is running our Gold Track, is constantly telling our startups and companies there that they should not think about selling their products to the investors, but promoting their companies. And that's very, very true. And what Joy just said is 100% right. It's we are certainly not at that point of recognition and awareness, also from entrepreneurs' perspective. But I think it's getting better and better. Of course, you have those international centers and clusters where we also have lots of researchers from abroad that bring that mentality. We also see that that even in European governments, the thinking is changing a bit. And I think it's also reflecting a bit in the valuation of companies. So you mentioned the almost 4 billion euro of overall valuation in 2020. Indeed, I also found that number in our deal room report that we collaborated to that was issued in April this year. And there it was stated that the overall valuation of European healthtech companies grew from 1.9 billion euro in 2016, so just 5 years ago. So it doubled up to 4 billion euro now. And also an interesting fact is that the combined, so that there was the investment, and the combined enterprise value of the European health tech startups has grown from 8 billion euro in 2016 to 41 billion euro in 2021. So you can clearly see that also the valuation of health tech companies and startups in Europe is dramatically growing. And I think that indeed has the two factors. One, of course, we just have more of those companies. So that, of course, contributes a lot to the overall valuation. But I think also that entrepreneurs are getting better in also selling not only their products, but also their companies as well.
I completely agree. There is a huge improvement on the market that I also perceive. I read an article on LinkedIn recently, which stated that investment-wise in private investments, I think we are already at 12 billion this year, which is as much as was invested in 2020. So, but it was an article that was published in July. So it's a great thing. I was smiling, Joy, when you mentioned Reddit. This chat app. So I always perceived Reddit as it's just a chat app for the young, like ICQ was in the 90s. So don't take that serious. And suddenly in January there was this. How should I call it? This big GameStop incident when a group of retail investors brought short sellers, so huge mutual funds, to their knees and just exaggerated a little bit and begging for mercy, so that the SEC intervened and investigated that case. And I started reading through these Reddit groups. And of course, I mean, there is a lot of, let's say, not very much politically correct chatter. But in between, there are serious analysis of companies on the market, and people openly share the information. And I'm quite amazed, and this is what I learned during the pandemic, how willing people in the United States are to share their research, to share their insights. Also, when you look at on YouTube, entrepreneurship advice, it's great what we see. And a question to you both: do you also see opening Europe up, let's say, to not being so closed down in communicating? We're really starting openly for free, sharing, putting out the information on the market. How do you create companies? How do you create startups? Do you see also a shift in the communication style in Europe?
A communication style. I would say that I mentioned earlier that we at EIT Health had a platform where we would allow innovators to meet each other so that they could come up together with certain solutions. And I think that this kind of platform, particularly when one knows that the information comes from a reputable source, or when one knows that the innovators are, have a healthcare goal in mind, that's when the most advances can come from it. And I think overall, EIT Health has positioned itself as a partner of choice, not only through its accelerator, where we work with other incubators and clusters and institutions that support companies and support them in soft landing. We see that this not a middleman, but a translator can often be very helpful when communicating these messages, because you do want to do so in a way that, of course, through the commission and through the other projects that we have at EIT Health, we are actively interested in sharing data and fair data, but we also need to actively define together what that means. What are the startups, for instance, in our community willing to share? We now have our partnership with Dealroom, where we do reports on our companies as a whole, on our portfolio, in specific areas and segments. But we also need to be aware of how willing companies, for instance, are to share that they're interested in a new funding round, this needs to be, I think, also part of the active conversation that I'd mentioned earlier about being okay to seek mentorship or offering mentorship yourself, as we have to find what everyone in the community is willing to put in and share, and also ensure that people are interested in taking something out of it.
It's a very it's an attitude, Kristen and Joy, that you were describing, that I know very well from my German past, let's say, to keep kind of secret and closed what you're working on, also as a scientist, and not share too much, which is on the one hand good, because we also see the problem that many companies want to file a patent and create IP on something that they already have published, which of course is public knowledge then, and you can't put a patent on that. So you have to be careful on what you share. On the other hand, or what you share publicly in a publication or in a public talk. On the other hand, collaboration is super important. So sharing insights to other colleagues, also other colleagues worldwide, and not working on difficult issues and big challenges, big scientific questions, everyone individually and alone. That doesn't bring anyone further. So that was also a big lesson of my PhD advisor Achim Honegger, that he said, let's be open. And he was a visiting professor at Stanford and MIT before, so he knew that culture. And when he took over the lab with his 40s and got chair, he clearly told everyone in the lab, please collaborate, please share your insights with all your colleagues that you collaborate internationally. And if someone steals your idea, then you will be quick in having the next one. But rather than slowly progressing individually and alone with what you're working for, then you can be sure that someone else will bypass you anyway. So try to be as quick as possible by collaborating with others, by exchanging with others. And then in the end, you will not win every race, but at least you have a chance to be the first one together with your colleagues in some of the questions. And I think that was an example from the academic world, but it very well translates also to our companies, because that's an important aspect. We try to form teams, especially in the early stage companies. In our boot camps, we bring together, or the wildcard projects, we bring together companies, 10 different companies, 10 different teams that work collaboratively, and that also test their ideas with pitching to each other, working in peer groups. And that, of course, is much stronger, especially on an international level, if you have these international teams and groups, than everyone just testing it with neighbor at home, or telling the girlfriend or boyfriend what they did. So I think that's really important and key learning. that is starting to take place. Not everywhere, but I think also in Europe we're getting better on that.
We actually have a pretty good example of two companies that met in one of our, not our most early stage program, actually a competition program, the European Health Catapult, where we offer mentoring and training to startups, but also prepare them for their next investment rounds. And like Claude was saying, they really form a cohort together, and two of these companies were so actively sharing with each other. They were with another company in a small working group, and once they had learned to trust each other, they began to even more actively share. And the result of this sharing was actually a new product and a new, company, an initiative where they recently applied for European funding as well with their joint resources. And I think that's something that we can see as a direct example of the fruits that you can bear if you are willing to collaborate with your peers.
There are great points in what you say. I think I once read that success is only defined by 5%. So ideas are only 5% of the success, and execution is the other 95%. So people should not be too worried about sharing ideas, because most people they share their ideas with don't have the will to execute on them. So the best mode is really, as you said, working hard. In 1995, Austria, I think it was 1995, hopefully, Austria joined the European Union. And when I was asked the question if that makes sense, it was sold. So the reason for joining the union was today's challenges can only be solved on a global level. So Austria alone cannot survive. So we need to be part of the European Union and part of the global community. And it resonated very well with me. It's one people, one currency, one market. It's Europe. And we connect with Asia and the United States or North America on the other side. And I think this project, the European Union developed very well up to 2020 when the pandemic hit. And since then, I perceived, not only in Europe, but I think also in what I get from the newspapers, also in the United States or in Asia, that the borders are going up again on one hand. On the other hand, I see a lot of fruitful collaboration. Just think about the vaccine development. The European example, BioNTech, the company didn't say we do it all by ourselves. So we just we not only developed the vaccine, we also tried to build the distribution network. They went a different route. So they started collaborating with Pfizer for the rollout, and also in China, what I read recently with Fosun Pharma. My question to you both is, when I see these two differences. So industry-wise, I see a lot of collaboration globally. And on the political landscape, I sometimes get the feeling that we are back in the 80s, so that the borders are back up. How do you see it in your daily work? Are we still moving towards a united Europe, or is there a little bit of drawback to nationalism in policy-wise?
I would say we certainly, even if the perception might be sometimes different, voiced and phrased through individuals and also sometimes through the corresponding media, I think we all know that we can only survive if we collaborate and if we face all the challenges together. So of course, unfortunately, we saw a rise of some right-wing parties in some countries that took benefit from the crisis and some of the actions, but in general, I think it's to most of the reasonable people, it's clear that without joining forces, we have no chance. And there's so many examples about how we should join forces. First, you mentioned just the vaccine production, looking to buying the vaccines. Of course, it was the European Union got into the trap to negotiate too long about the price, and then all the vaccines were sold to others. That was not the best example, but on the other hand, it also shows if all would have joined that joint mechanism of getting vaccines, and also not trying to get everything themselves, but also leaving enough for other continents, especially the less developed continents and the less rich ones. I think that's also our responsibility. Second, actually we had a think tank exercise at EIT Health, and there we looked into what we need for artificial intelligence for health, and there we identified 3 things that we can only do on a European level. One is we need a robust infrastructure for our digital health environment and for our data. That's the European health data space. And that's something that you can't do individually. Not every country can do that individually. We have seen that in Estonia, that they have built that kind of in their model project, let's call it like that, in a rather small country. They can do that, but for a broad rollout where you also want to cover people that live in one country and work in another country, you need a central European health data space. And the predecessor, or the first step, was GDPR. We all know that GDPR had positive effects, but also some not so positive effects. And from my perspective, one of the big issues was that they thought about it. I know that they thought about it, but in the end, in order to get the compromise through the member states and the council, they just decided to not take the European health data space into GDPR. In the end, it would have been much better to already include it upfront, that medical data can be treated differently to all kind of other personal and private data. Now we have to provide the right framework afterwards, which doesn't make it easier. So that's the second big challenge, to provide the right framework for management and governance. Regarding infrastructure, there's also something on its way, Gaia X. That's kind of the hardware infrastructure, let's say, to enable the cloud computing, the data storage in a very safe, very clear environment. I think that's super important. And last but not least, that's the third point. We have already the MDR for medtech devices. Now it's aligned between biotech and medtech, even if there's still some hiccups, but I think that's in principle there. And we need, of course, also to adapt that to digital health and digital medicines. So that's still an open point. That is a huge disadvantage for European companies, because they don't have their own single market. I don't want to even start talking about reimbursement, because the fragmentation in the reimbursement sector in Europe is a nightmare. That's something for the not near future, but midterm future, to also get that solved. And that's something that we have to solve together. Otherwise, our companies in Europe always will be a bit behind the US and Asian companies. But that's I would say the 3 key challenges that we have to address, and where it's super clear that we can only address that together. Now, coming from the 3 key aspects that policy has to change and has to work on together on a European level, I'd like to still go back to the companies, to the startups, thinking the same thing from a startup perspective. What I just said about the reimbursement scheme, and also partially the regulatory. If companies think national, they immediately will come to their limits. So if they want to scale sufficiently, they have to think European, at least European, right from the beginning. In the end, they should even think global, but for the first step, it might be okay if they think European, and European means maybe just the expansion from their home market to the next neighbor market, and then to the next one. But if they set up everything only focusing on their home market, and we have some very good examples from a Belgium company that gets a patent on their digital health algorithm. They get regulatory approval. They even get prescription by doctors and reimbursement by the insurance companies in Belgium. And then I mean, it's not too difficult to cover the Belgian market, but then you have to scale and to expand. And then they realized there is nothing comparable in any of the other countries. So that was a big issue for them. Now they are doing very well. They even got FDA approval, but you have to think European. So that also links kind of tasks for European decision makers and policy, plus the preparedness of European companies to start European right away.
I completely agree to what you say, and I was smiling as you mentioned GDPR. I started using the internet in the 90s, and the narrative back then was think twice before you put something online because it sticks there forever. So don't be sorry afterwards. And now I see in Europe that we have a different approach. So people put everything online, and then we try to create policies to protect them afterwards. So it's quite an interesting development. Joy, what policy changes would you think would be helpful to help the European health tech sector grow faster, quicker, and better?
Maybe I will reinterpret your question on policies and talk about initiatives to policies that have already been agreed upon. But rather, I think one thing that has already been identified from a startup support perspective is that there are a lot of European institutions that have been acting on policies and on the interests of the European Union, of the startups, to create programs or funding offers for companies. So much that it begins to become a little bit difficult for a startup to navigate. Which European institution can provide me what sort of support? So, of course, I mean, we focused in the beginning of this call on EIT. EIT is focused on bringing together industry, education, as well as entrepreneurship. But we also have other institutions such as the European Innovation Council, which offers funding. And lately, it has a new opportunity, a new offer, which is blended financing. So not only this public sector support that has already previously existed when it was named the SME instrument phase 1 and phase 2. But now the European Innovation Council, in its redesign, is offering 3 different programs focusing on basically the EIC Accelerator, EIC Transitions offer, and the EIC Pathfinder offer. Each of those, the first that I mentioned is for the more mature companies. But actually, at the beginning of this year, or at the end, or the middle of last year, we learned about the opportunity for us to actually be able to connect EIT and EIC together. And we were the ones, again, writing a grant proposal to actually be able to merge these institutions together. While EIT is very focused on sector specifics, as well as a deeply embedded regional network that connects the local nodes to each other, EIC is quite sector agnostic, but holds most of the funding buckets. So we had to think to ourselves, how could we, create a startup offering that would allow EIT and EIC to work together? And the same team that had worked on the accelerated timeline of bringing this startup rescue instrument to life was also and is currently implementing a project since July to be able to link the 2 institutions together. But why is that interesting, and why did I just even mention that when we talked about internationalization and we talked about policy? Because in essence, the companies that are supported from EIC have been selected for their very risky approach and their ability to really provide a service to, as a product or as a service to patients. But to de-risk that funding, what we can do at EIT Health, for instance, is to connect them to our experts locally. But often that's not enough. We have to, like some of the startups that we spoke with that have commended our mentoring and coaching network, have said, you might have to find that one expert that is that absolute leading researcher in molecular glue in order to be able to make the advances. And that researcher might not be sitting in Munich, Germany. That researcher might be sitting in Łódź, Poland or something. And I think the ability for these two institutions to work together and to align at an operational level can really do a lot for the companies and build both of the portfolios so that we can fill in the gaps of medical need that we've already identified.
Thank you, Joy. That was a super important example about how politics already, or not only politics, but also the commission join forces, and also because we talked about pandemics, reflecting how that all started. I remember that after our annual summit, 2019 in Paris, with more than 1,000 participants from our partnership, Jan Philipp and I, our CEO, and I. We have been fully exhausted after these couple of days at the summit, and then we entered the plane and flew to Brussels to visit Jean-David Malot, the director of EIC, the EISME, as it's called now. So we flew to him and explained why there is such a strong overlap between EIT Health and EIC. So there's a couple of companies, actually 25% back then, that have been supported by EIT Health and by EIC together. And there was not much communication between and not any alignment between those two European institutions. So we hardly could explain anyone why there is no collaboration, even if we are funded both by the same taxpayers' money from European citizens. And we identified a couple of good items that we wanted to work on, and then it still took more than half a year until we got into concrete actions and steps. And due to the pandemics, of course, it didn't get easier, at least at the first place, because everyone was distracted by all kinds of other things and fires that he had to solve. But then it also showed up that it's much better if you don't have to fly to Brussels for a 2 hours meeting, but if you can just start an online meeting to have a 30 minutes conversation, but that in a pretty regular pace. So that helped a lot. And since then, we have a very regular exchange with representatives from EIC. And indeed, Joy's team, they did not even have time to recover a bit after the rescue instrument implementation, when they already had to start to outline the concrete proposal for the EIC-EIT collaboration. But in the end, it was rated excellent in all categories by the external evaluators that also, of course, had to evaluate that proposal. And now we are looking forward to the outcome of that. It will be super important. And to go from EIC to another European institution, EIF, the European Investment Fund, that has started a bit earlier, the collaboration between EIT Health and the European Investment Fund. But in the end, the collaboration piece that we are doing there is also super strong and super heavy. In the end, we talk about €2 billion investment that we want to move into the healthcare innovation ecosystem driven by startups, and a large percentage of that also will go into digital health. So the idea is that we bring together corporate investors from our EIT Health partnership, and in fact, there's also a lot of pharma corporates that are interested in that. Not only, we also see interest from Google Alphabet and their European representation and several others, but certainly a strong pharma interest, and private VCs. So in the end, EIF always said we would like to change the fact that many European corporates rather invest or even acquire startups and scale-ups from overseas rather than focusing on European companies. And EIF is, of course, bound to financial outcome and financial returns. So they cannot just co-invest alongside strategic investors like corporates. That is just not allowed and not legal. So therefore, we created a model where we link our corporate investors, strategic investors, to qualified private VCs. The private VC always has a financial interest, that's in their nature. Therefore, EIF can co-invest alongside them. And therefore, we can bring in the corporate investors into that triangle. And the Commission unlocked 150 million euro in total in 2 tranches. 75 million euro are already committed, have been committed last year at the Healthtech Innovation Days. That was opened by President Macron. And Thierry Breton was the one bringing that message that the 75 million euro are unlocked, and another 75 million euro will be unlocked as soon as we bring sufficient corporate investors. And through that EU funding, then there is also a commitment from all the corporates that come in, plus the leverage with the Sustainable Development Umbrella Fund of the European Commission, managed by the European Investment Fund, and the private investments from the private VCs. We will manage a leverage of 2 billion euro in total through that so-called Venture Center of Excellence. So it started. If any VC is listening to that podcast who is interested in that, we certainly will put a link on that at the website. So certainly another very, very strong European initiative that has been started, and also that shows the big trust in the collaboration of our institutions.
There are two points that I would like to connect to tackle one last topic in this podcast. It's one part is the team building. I completely agree to what you said, Joy, that startups should bring the best team together, no matter where the people are. So it doesn't matter if this is an Austrian woman or man, or if the best person sits in China or in the United States or in the UK. Bringing the best execution team together to move the company forward to the great vision the company, of course, has, is key to success. But it all boils down to the availability of capital on the market, and this connects to what you said, Kurt. Europe, and also in the talk with you, I mean, Europe has really great public funding instruments, but I cannot 100% fund a company with public funds only. So I also need private funds. And I come from a time of scarcity. So 2008, for example, fundraising in the mid of a financial crisis was next to impossible. And also in the years until 2019, as I also said before, I still had the, let's say, the perception of the European market that there's a scarcity of capital. Is this picture still true? Or did I miss something in the last 2 years? How do you see the availability of private funding, so private equity, venture capital, angel funding, corporate funding for private deep tech startup companies? Do we need more capital? Is there still opportunity on the market, or are we overfinanced already?
Let me start on that. Couple of examples. The first example is the German newspaper Handelsblatt has just a month ago or so published an infographics that showed the top investors for digital health companies, and they looked into the top 100 German digital health companies and looked who is the investors. And then you could see that more than 30 of those companies have been invested by Healthtech Gründerfonds, which is partially private but mainly public. Investor number 2 is already EIT Health with 9 companies. And then you have to go down further the line to find some private investors. So that certainly shows how strong maybe the public investments are, but also the need to get more private investments in that sector. So that is certainly true, and that is a clear picture. So I don't want to miss the public funding, but I think we certainly need more private funding. The second topic is, I think there is a lot of money in the market right now, because what should you do with your money? The only reasonable thing you can do is invest into startups. There's hardly anything else. And by the way, we also see that some of our former team members now moved into VCs because there have been so many new VCs built up with all kind of special focus. So I think there is some movement, and the money that is available will be invested. Nevertheless, especially in the digital health market, it is an issue if you don't have a clear reimbursement pathway. So for an investor, it's always important to see how will that company make revenue. And as we are not in a consumer market, we just address potential buyers in a B2C market. Here it is totally different. So it's super heavy regulated, and you have to outline your reimbursement schemes. Therefore, I think that will also get much better as soon as we have clear reimbursement pathways. And Germany, with its EIT approach, so the digital health applications that can be now reimbursed, we have, I think now, since August 2021, we have 19 DiGA companies that are listed, and 5 of them even permanently. The other 14 have still 12 months time to demonstrate and show their evidence. That I think will trigger lots more of investments in digital health. So that's clearly on the rise, but you're not missing out anything if you say there is still some potential to get more investments into the digital health area.
Joy, how do you perceive the investment market in Europe?
Well, I would also say there is still room for improvement, and that's exactly why we have initiatives such as the Venture Center of Excellence to increase the amount that we can have in rounds within Europe. Of course, VC investment since 2016 has increased and has almost doubled. However, that the number of companies active in the market also has, and the entire space of digital health has grown. We already mentioned that in the beginning, and you see that there's a need for the companies that were already supported in the 2016-2017 rounds to receive their top up for their later stage financing. But beyond the fact that the rounds are needing to increase, or that the money needs to be made available, I think the necessity to not only think about the reimbursement pathways, but also to re-verify how we would like patients to participate in that. Patients aren't really incentivized to participate, and investors are supporting the reimbursement and regulatory market. They're not interacting with the consumers or the customers per se. Those that benefit, the patients, are not the ones that are paying. The co-payments are quite low for a patient or consumer, and when you don't have skin in the game, of course, you make different choices. And so I think the challenge will be how can we incentivize investors? How can we ensure that these regulatory and reimbursement schemes also contain voices from patient advocates, from patient advocate groups, from patients themselves, in order to start a conversation about how can we change these payment models as well. So it's not only about the money, of course.
Maybe two things to add that just came to my mind. One thing is, I think besides the reimbursement schemes for the DiGAs, the German Ministry of Health also did something very right. They created the Health Innovation Hub. That's a very strong think tank of smart people, previous entrepreneurs and experts that try to to also bring other stakeholders into that digital health market. So for example, the payers themselves. So there is now a clause in the legal framework that allows them to invest into companies to a very limited amount, but to invest into new digital health startups themselves. And the team of the Health Innovation Hub now really tries also to motivate the payers to do so. So they even try to bring them, for example, into our Venture Center of Excellence in order to get access to great European digital health startups. So that is a great outcome that I like very much. The second thing, what also we do ourselves is, of course, we present our startups at as many events as possible. So we present them with an investor pitch at all kind of events in order to identify potential customers, but also potential investors. And as such, I'd like to just highlight a couple of events that we are preparing right now. There is the SAX Forum that takes place 2 times a year, and where EIT Health is always a strong partner. There is the eHealth Investment Forum taking place in Spain. There is the Innovation Day happening in September and focusing on September 21st on digital health in Erlangen, which is organized by the German newspaper or magazine Wirtschaftswoche together with Jens Spahn, the German health minister, and many others. There is a permanent representation of EIT Health startups at the startup conference 4 years from now at the World Work Congress. And EIT Health is also presenting startups at the MedTech Live. We always have a startup pitch contest at the MedTech Live that is happening in spring in Nuremberg, so far virtually, but next year also in a hybrid version in Nuremberg. And last but not least, there's of course also our EIT Health Catapult Business Plan competition with the 3 categories. So we have a semi-final in biotech, a semi-final in medtech, and a semi-final in digital health. That will happen this year in December. And the winners of these semifinals will be presented at our summit that will happen next year in May, I think, in Stockholm, where we also will allow our startups to pitch. So I think it's super important to not only talk about those startups, but also really present them either physically or at least in an online format to investors and to potential collaboration partners. Ideally, a mix of both. Smart money is, of course, always the best if you have smart investors that also can not only financially, but also with their expertise contribute to the growth of the company. That is our desired outcome.
One final question I would like to ask you both. So there are these events where people can connect with EIT Health, of course, but what if someone listens to this podcast and wants to get in touch with you directly with EIT Health? What's the best way for startups, corporate partners, and VCs to connect with EIT?
I think, of course, the individuals that are listening can reach out to us. But the great asset that we have at EIT Health is that we have offices throughout Europe. And therefore, we also have business creation leads and business creation managers that are supporting companies within these regional hubs. And these are the go-tos to ask about the new programs that are launching, some of which have a deadline in mid-September, such as Bridgehead. But these individuals are really the experts connecting the local ecosystem together. And you can find them on our webpage at the Help for Applicants page. So our business creation experts will definitely be able to connect you and support on the startup journey. I think that's more the startup focused side, and maybe Kurt can give his insights on the VC aspect.
Exactly. So Joy rightly outlined. We have all our regional teams in our regional offices that take care of the startups. With the investors, it's similar. Also, the investors are usually taken care of by the regional teams, but please feel invited and feel free to get in touch with Joy and myself directly if you would like to assess a bit more intensively which program might be the most relevant for you. And then we would connect you to the relevant people, either in the regional hubs or in the programs, whatever is most important or suits you best. But very much looking forward to get in touch.
Joy Cürten, thank you very much for giving great insights into the European, let's say, health tech ecosystem. Please keep up your great work and keep helping, evolving and developing the ecosystem further. Thank you very much for this discussion.
Thank you, Christian. Thanks, Joy.
Thank you, Christian.
Have a great day. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening. Please share the podcast and make sure you've subscribed. Have a great day.